Good day, fellow deal makers. Welcome to the Deal Scout. Listen, the purpose and mission of this show is to put deals and deal makers together. So first off the bat, if you're working on a deal, looking for a deal, or would like to talk about a deal on a show, head on over to thedealscout.com, fill out a quick form, maybe get you on the show. Now, with that in mind, I go out into the world seeking different types of deal makers, ranging from building apps and raising capital to SPACs, family offices, everything in between, because I want to learn about different types of deals and then bring that to my community. So on today's show, this is a special introduction because it came as an introduction, a very unique way that it was introduced even from one of our friends, Jordan, out of Orlando. And Jordan made an introduction in a way that I've never been introduced before, but it started a conversation with David, and David does this professionally. Introductions. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man. All right. So, David, tell us a little bit about what you do.
I'm happy to. And the way I'll tell you about what I do is to really understand how you work, right? Podcasts, different focuses, and how you work as a connector. Connecting people that relationship value. What I do in life is connect people to each other who are those super nodes, high integrity, action-oriented, natural givers that by virtue of the fact that I or somebody else like our mutual friend Jordan would leave my kids with you, mean that you can shortchange what is often multiple years of building a relationship because of the way that I've created a systemic approach to connectivity. So what I do every day is talk to people. I aim to solve their problems, often as the most connected person they've ever met, by connecting them to the most connected person that they should have met, that either everyone assumed they knew or is most relevant for them, with no ask back, but for them to honor the chain of connections and let me know what's happened from that ideally substantive intro.
Yeah. So as a connector, right? Connectors are connectors, right? Like we start having a conversation, and even before we hit record, and even in our past conversations, we're like, "Oh, I know someone you should meet," and we're constantly going, "Oh, you should meet this friend or do this," or right? So that's a natural thing for people like you and I. How in the world did you turn this into a business, and where are the shortfalls for those listening who are natural connectors, natural networkers? Where does the business model fall apart, or they're missing opportunity? What are your thoughts?
Sure. Let me address that last one first, because this is the thing that I'm really starward and adamant that connectors understand about our relationship power. For our ability to create relationship trust, no one values this the same way we look at two of the most precious commodities in our lives, time and money. I'd be hard pressed, Josh, and you tell me if you don't think this is true, to think of a single thing you have in life that wasn't a relationship built by time and money. One or both as a combination. So if it is true, or you could surmise for the sake of this argument that it's true that relationships are paramount and sit above those two, then why do we not value the people who have built those relationships with the same type of commodity as we do with somebody who has something else to offer?
Yeah.
So the problem, right, and this is the problem, connectors want to connect because we love to connect. The endorphins rise, it thrills us to make an intro and see something substantive from it. But we do not stop with a certain number of intros, which for me is 3, without seeing if the people we're connecting to will actually respect us back in terms of what happens from those introductions. And often we don't ask for that response. Therefore, it is our responsibility to make sure that when we make intros, we require a responsiveness for that person to stay in our network and to keep engaging with them.
Wow. So this is something that I am guilty of, right? And I've put together groups that have wound up building multi-million-dollar businesses and invested in each other and done deals together. And, you know, I've put together groups and I've established leadership teams, brought on board of directors and advisors, right? So I have built strategic and massive teams and investors and partners, and I put it together, and then there it goes. And
Correct.
then I've gotten little feedback, and up until now I haven't learned how to be rewarded for the effort and work that I've put in because of the superpower of being able to be a connector. Right? So
This is the
you're hitting
exact
a
dilemma,
nerve,
right?
buddy. You're hitting a
And
strong nerve.
so listen, right? When
Yeah.
you are sitting there making these connections, you're thinking about all the possibilities of how one, two, or groups of people will interact and what will happen.
Yeah.
What you were not saying is, I can't wait to be along for the ride with you. You're not saying, I want you to honor specifically that term, the chain of the connections I've made. So the connections I make for you or the connections they make, just keep me in the loop. When you ask for relevance, what happens is people's reputational value becomes at risk if they don't honor that.
Yeah.
Because if you are vouching for these people and their integrity and what they're doing, then that needs to be reciprocal by them literally just coming back to you to say thank you. And that power of gratitude can be it, but unless you ask for it, shame on you, shame on me for not having done it.
That's awesome right there, right? So I'm taking notes, and I would consider myself a pro at this. That's something that I'm not doing well. So I appreciate you sharing that with me.
So here's the hard part. You want to know when you realize you should have done it better? At that moment
Yeah.
in your life, for all that you have given, when you need something to come back to you and everyone you thought you built that karma with doesn't
Yes.
return the call or doesn't help. Because
Yeah.
everyone experiences that, whether it's
Yeah.
a friend who got long COVID and needed to have a business partner take up something and the person wasn't there. People going through divorce who've just had an ailing parent, people whose kids get sick, and suddenly they realize their relevance is only when people are asking something of them.
Yeah.
And what the relevance for a connector needs to be is somebody who understands that I, for instance, maintain a high network of integrity to thousands of people. The joke is I know no one, but the people I know the world. So I'll give you a quick anecdote just to color this, right? So one of my events I was running in New York a few years ago, one of my friends, he's an incredible guy. I won't name him because he listens to everything I do. But he says to me, what do you mean you run the network of networks? You're the connector of connectors. And I go, well, one, I didn't call myself that. You did. So you can't say I'm pretentious for calling myself a connector of connectors. I just live to make relational value valued. But I say, all right, listen, I said to him live in this event, tell me 3 people you want to see if my network has access to, and we'll live test this in the room. And he goes, okay, the Pope, the Dalai Lama, and Sir Paul McCartney. So I go, all right, show of hands. Who here has access to the Dalai Lama? And 6 people raise their hands. And my buddy Daniel goes, I got everyone beat. Look on my Instagram. And it's him and His Holiness in India the week before doing empathy work with kids in poverty. I was like, that's pretty cool. Everyone like wants to figure out about this guy who's a South Florida guy, unlike us North Central guys. And the next one is the Pope. And my friend goes, well, my business partner runs the Vatican Smart Cities program. Everyone goes, okay, that's relevant. And then there's quiet. I'm thinking, maybe no one in this room has access to Paul. Then a friend raises her hand and she goes, the Pope and the Dalai Lama, like, they're relevant, but everyone wants the Beatles. And I go, well, how do you have access? And she goes, well, I'll be out at Jimmy and Jane's house on Shelter Island to jam with him this weekend. And I'm thinking, like Parrot Heads? She goes, yeah, they're my friends. And the 3 people who mentioned these connections are the most unassuming people you would meet. They're not the alpha male walk into a room with a Yale sweater around. They're not the power broker. They're not the person with the last name everyone would recognize. But if you're telling me that the relevance of that, of the Pope, the Dalai Lama, and Sir Paul McCartney isn't valuable, and then the idea, and this is the other part of the challenge, to going back to your question, you can't advertise that. You can't walk around going, I have access to somebody, because it cheapens the value of that relationship. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we have to lean in as connectors, and this is the solution, to talk about what ignites our passion and that impact, and how that impact can be amplified. Mm-hmm. And when we approach it that way, even if it's about making money, or it's about charity or impact, or something as simple as, needing connections to learn how to help potty train a dog during COVID, which was an ask made of me, I successfully brokered. The idea is that if we lean into that, what happens from it is profound. Because what we trigger in people is the relationships they did not know they had, often not as natural connectors like us. Mm-hmm. And this is where I believe the more that we take that relationship value and we make it what we lead with empathy, with passion and purpose, the world changes, because the number one thing we pride ourselves on that keeps us sane, that helps us fight loneliness, that helps us motivate and change our lives, are the people around us. And that, for me, is the most valuable commodity on the planet.
So in a business, right, you put together people, you've helped broker relationships, you've exchanged, you've vouched for people, right? You've helped people speed up the process of time and money to get to relationships. You've transferred trust, right? Like, these are the things that you've helped do. How have you turned that into a business? Like, how do you survive? How do you keep your lights on? How do you build a future for yourself and your family with that skill set?
Sure. I appreciate that question, because figuring out this model took me several years, several failures, and working for an incredible family office where I was required to measure the effectiveness of what I did as a connector, along with building a company. Mm-hmm. So the answer is this. You cannot monetize an individual connection. Making one relationship to another, or saying you have access to somebody, will you pay me for it, doesn't work. But if you think about the power of the connections you have just in the world of deals and deal making, what you've built is an ecosystem. Am I right?
You got it.
So if you built an ecosystem of everything you just said back to me, of trust and value, then isn't there something to say that your ability to build that ecosystem for somebody else is not inherently one of the most valuable businesses you could give them? Mm-hmm. So that's part one of my theory for this, which is now my practice and my business, called Orchestrated Opportunities. Number two, and this is the mistake many connectors make or are forced to make, which is this idea that, of course, let me just give you access to every wealthy, influential, prominent person I know. And if they like you and what you do and they invest in you, then you'll cut me in. One, there's regulatory issues with a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Two, in what world would you hand somebody all of the cards in your deck and then say, let's play cards? If relationship value is valuable, then somebody would be hiring you for your ability to build relationships, and the relationships you have, you can build intersecting your ecosystem with theirs. So I figured out the one thing, again, related to relationships and reputational value, that people won't mess with, which is somebody could say, hey, I know you know Josh, you're on his podcast. He has a couple deals I want to get into. Can you connect me? And I go, okay. But if you're paying me to do it, where does Jordan fit in to that scenario? With his law firm, with his national practice? Because you can ask of my time and I can give it, but you cannot ask me to ask of another connector's time without either putting me on a retainer and or equity into what you're doing. Because if you have enough means to scale what you were doing, then you should give me the ability to either invest in my connectors to support what you're doing as well, or compensate me for my time to do favors back to Jordan for what access to you has given me. And when you put that just in simple forms, it's, if somebody doesn't want to pay for your time, they certainly aren't going to cheapen your relationship with somebody else. Yeah. And that is the business model that I've adopted, because everyone that I work with asks of me one of two things: my time or my time, because they often don't need or want the money that I'm getting paid on retainer to build ecosystems, especially in the world of impact, with family offices and B Corps. What they want is my time to focus on and ask for them into my network or into my larger network that's relevant, that they can't deliver on their own. And that is the value. That's the business proposition that keeps relationship value intact when transaction occurs.
Super cool, man. So people hit me up, when you start building a podcast show or a following, and then what people are able to do with LinkedIn, for example, they could go to my LinkedIn and they could see, oh, wow, Josh is connected with fill in the blank, right? I get messages that go, hey, will you introduce me to so-and-so, right? Big name person or something like that. And what they're doing is they're asking for a transfer of trust, right? Is what you're saying. And that puts me as the connector in a challenging position to defend my reputation, my trust. I might not even know the person on LinkedIn. So you have said, I have built this practice over years of trials and testing. And that was a part of my job at the family office, is to prove relational value, right? So you started building out this ecosystem and this product, this service that you offered to people. What were some of the mistakes that you made early on? Because you said you failed your way to where you guys are now, towards impact, towards building some cool stuff. So what were some of the mistakes you made as a connector along the way? This is fascinating. I appreciate you doing this, by the way.
Yeah, my pleasure, right? And you obviously get this, so it's great to talk to a peer in this way.
Yeah.
I just do want to mention for those listening, right? I made that North Central Florida reference, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I might have seen you wrestle alligators as a child.
Boom!
So,
Ocala, Florida.
Go Gators, right? Gainesville, Florida, right? Things that in my world of growing up in North Central Florida, Ocala was too far. Now I'm thinking it's only going to take me 30 minutes to get my kids later. The world expands from small town Florida.
Yeah.
So all right, so here's the answer, right? The primary mistake I made is the mistake most people make with me, which is I assumed everyone in my network I trusted knew each other, or knew my trust of me to them to each other. That is why I built a purpose-driven community that has no membership or sponsorship. Because mistake number one was spending a decade of my life thinking people who were seemingly relevant to each other have the strength of connection I had with them. Second part of that was I was too scared to be an entrepreneur and build this from what I built myself until necessity forced it upon me. Number one fear of entrepreneurs. So again, my fear being mortgage and 2 small children, living in New York. For anyone who lives or knows here, it's an expensive city before inflation hit the world.
Yeah.
So right now things are catching up to New York prices. My milk doesn't cost that much more. It already was expensive. So the idea that I wasn't ready led me to do something that put my rule system in place. So it was a benefit in disguise, which was I will help all of my connectors as much as they ask. However, that community is now 900 of people like you. So think about how much time you have for those people asking you for introductions.
Yeah.
This is why I put a system in place, right? Number one thing, the problem I said to solve before, it's called honoring the chain of connections. You can see the article on my website, orchestratedconnecting.com. We can send it out, whatever follow-up there is. The idea is lean in with gratitude, and it solves the idea of you not wanting to have the ego to take credit for something that you made through an intro. And the power of gratitude gets you access to everyone substantive who's been on that path, because everyone will stop to hear thank you without a follow-up ask. So when you honor the chain, you solve part of this problem. The other part, and this is where I led by example, I stopped giving after a few intros unless people proved that they were ready to give to others. And that's where the community became strong, because I don't think I hope you can help me at some point in my career, Josh, but I don't care if you do, because you might help other people in my network. And as long as I lead with that attitude, which is what I began with, it creates an intentional community where everyone leans into act, because connectors by nature are very uncomfortable when they're being given to more than they are giving.
Yeah.
And that is the psychology, which I'm writing a book now about, that helps me understand how different connectors work and why, to change this world of connectivity, we have to change how connectors ask and where we draw the line.
How we draw the line, that's a boundary. How do we say no, right? How do we protect the thing? So I'm 40 now, dude, and I used to wrestle alligators at Silver Springs Park. So maybe one day we were in the same park together.
Yeah, I'm 43, so it's very likely.
Super cool. So in this, my probably number one business skill, life skills, being able to build relationships, build trust with people, right? Because I'm an open book, open kimono, cold, wet day. That's how I structure my life. I had to learn this, but I built some solid relationships. People come to me, and the one thing that they want is a business outcome, and they see people as the tool to get there, right?
Yep.
How do you protect, right? So someone comes to you and they're like, "Hey, dude, could you introduce me to Josh? I know, I want to be on his podcast show, and it looks like he's involved in some deals, and we're looking for money. Hey, dude, please do an intro to Josh real quick." How do you protect that, and how do you turn it around to a value proposal?
So the answer is, if you want to say no, you just say no, right? People are afraid to do it, but you
Yeah.
say no. Sometimes you say no to people enough, they come back and they ask you the right way for the yes. Second part of that is, you can teach people how to ask you. I literally say to people, make an ask of me, but talk about the impact of what you want to do. Talk about how your vision is going to be amplified, and tell me the type of connections you need for this. I call this the impact ask. When people read that, or they make that ask of me, even cold outreach on LinkedIn, if they've actually taken the time to be relevant and read what I write, then what they've done is they've given me the triggers to see if an intro I could make could be of mutual value, not of transactional value or pass-through value, which is what they're asking. And if somebody's asking for my access to you, right? Let's say my network, here's this podcast, right? Because obviously I promised to promote this too, not just depend on your network for it. And everyone listening goes, man, I want to get my deals on Josh's thing. My question before I make the intro to you is, how are you going to be square with Josh on this? Do you plan to make him an advisor to give him equity? Do you have an ability to bring him on as a consultant to find deals in your ecosystem given his purview? I ask for the connector in my network to be relevant for when I make the intro. And if I'm satisfied with the response, I make it. If people give me a satisfactory, I'm not sure, could you tell me what is standard, I make the intro. If somebody's like, listen, I know Josh has access to Mark Cuban, like I got something for Mark, I'm thinking, you don't want to talk to Mark. You don't want to talk to Josh, you want to talk to Mark. So one, you just failed because you just said you wanted to go through Josh. And two, I have 6 access points to Mark Cuban. I don't know him, but I have friends who played on the Spurs. I have friends who built businesses with him. I have friends who work in Shark Tank and things. So you just missed the mark by wanting to get through me to Josh to get to somebody. You're not talking about the value we have. And so I filter those people out because they're not givers, they're takers.
Givers and takers. So this is something that I'm 40 freaking years old, learning how to do this, because, you build a show, you build a little bit of a following, you build a, kick-ass Rolodex that people can view into, and people ask all the time. The number one message I get on LinkedIn is, well, two, is like, congrats on the new business or the new job or the whatever. I've had some adventures there. That's on another podcast. We could share that story. But then two is, hey, I'm looking for money. I'm looking for a connection to an investor, something like that.
Yeah.
Teach me and other networkers like how to say no. That is the simplest probably thing that I should know as a networker, connector, and relationship builder, because the downside of being the connector, networker, relationship person, people pleaser, right?
Sure. So given you have successful podcasts, successful preview already, What somebody asking to get through you is an opportunity to tell them everything you're doing in a nice way. So let's say that ask is made of me, right? Number one ask of me lately, I want to get something to Ray Dalio because I worked with Ray's family, right? It's on my resume. Son and daughter-in-law are my friends. Like, okay, one, if you've ever read Ray's book, you have to triangulate. And I'm not one of the people who would triangulate. Well, tell me if Paul Tudor Jones is involved with something, then maybe you can start to get access. But it's not even about getting access because they know what they need and they lead it. It's an exceptionally smart, driven family this way. So when somebody makes an ask like that, I say, listen, like, I really appreciate you reaching out. Right now, I'm focused on mental health and teen girls with a project I'm working on with a family office out of California. A circular economy advisory board position. They just closed a $45.4 million fund, and I'm helping some of their portfolio companies as an advisor. And I am really focused more and more on helping Black and Brown founders, especially with mental health, and helping make connections to a friend's fund of funds. If any of those things seem relevant, I'd love your help. How did that no sound?
The judo approach of just going, actually, I need your help. Here's what I'm looking at.
Yeah. Or just what you're busy with, right? Like, I come from the world of being a trained classical musician. That's why I call my business Orchestrated Connecting. You learn in composition that the easiest thing to distinguish in the ear, which is called a fifth, right? Like a C to a G, is a missed opportunity to vary it, to give more nuance to what happens. So when I apply that type of understanding of composition to connecting or responses, right? There's no, but in the world of improv comedy, it's yes and. So I just took that to be no and. And if somebody wants something through me, I say, hey, my business is working. I'm very busy. Here's what I'm doing. Here's where I'm leaning in. And here's what happens. 80% of the time when somebody made what would be an inferior ask, not a bad one, right? They might have a really good reason. They might come back and go, oh my God, I checked out that circular economy group called Regeneration you're an advisor to. Did you read Andy Dunn's book about being bipolar and running bonobos? And I go, yeah, I was at his book launch. They're like, oh, my dad's bipolar. I want to buy it. And actually, I'd love to connect to Andy about this. Then I go, why? And then the person who seemingly was irrelevant, who seemingly was a bad connection goes, oh, well, my family owns this company. We have mental health in the family. We're thinking about coming out and saying we're leaders who have mental health. So there's always an opportunity from those. It's never just about the no, it's about the connection. And if you can manage that right, you can filter out quickly where it's an irrelevant connection, where it's somebody, not just to keep quoting Adam Grant, but where it's somebody that is literally looking through you, not with you. Mm. And if you're a true connector, you can turn those connections that were seemingly faulty into your ecosystem.
Wow. So I am thrilled that we're having this conversation because I'm learning, taking a crap ton of notes over here. And, you know, as any specialty, as any superpower in life, it has to be honed, it has to be developed. And, you know, I woke up and, you know, I read a book called, you know, How to Be a Super Connector with Judy Robinett. And then have you read that one or met with Judy?
I've read, if I just moved, so if my bookshelf was behind me, every one of those books, including hers, would be there.
Yeah.
I've read all of these books. I think there's great tidbits in all of them. In some cases, like her book, like I took it to heart and I joined a board. Yeah. I joined several boards. One of them was a group called the Arthur Miller Foundation, given the reason I grew up in sunny Florida was my dad's a Shakespearean scholar teaching at the University of Florida. So that's why I'm a Florida boy from a Harvard trained professor. And I learned that, you know, I love theater. I joined this board. It got me to the point where I launched my company, because from joining that board, I met the family office I worked for several years. And that friendship and being in that world of family offices gave me street cred to run an impact focused business afterwards.
Yeah. Super cool. So she was the first person who showed me that there's a business of the world of connecting.
Mm-hmm.
What you're showing is like how to hone it, how to build a system, how to build a process, how to build a machine around it, because this is what you have done. Do you have,
Yes.
so your community, your network of networkers, your connector of connectors? I've got a lot to learn. Is this stuff that you teach externally of people how to harness it and help mold and shape and mentor other connectors and networkers?
So the answer is, if you were a connector and you would be described as a high integrity human being, the specific language is action oriented natural giver. I or somebody else would leave my kids with. I give my time to those connectors. In my business, I teach people how to do this. At some point, especially after I finish my book, the goal was this year, maybe I'll do a speaking tour about it. But the most salient points of this are all on my website. How to gain the influence, how to honor the chain, what the ask is. I make things simple. I make them focused, because all I've done is taken a very complex situations and put it into a circumstance anyone can understand. Because if you create something that is translatable, people can get the larger image from it. And this is a lot of where the positive psychology and the other work that comes in. There's a deep psychological focus, but I don't lead with that. It's under the surface.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But the biggest challenge, right, since we're talking about, this being a deal show, right? Like, what's the deal? Like, this guy talks about connecting. Maybe he has means. I don't, right? I just moved. I live decently, but like, I don't have millions in the bank, because my value is relationship value, and that is not yet valued. So let me tell you the single other failure of connectivity, and this is the strangest one. Every VC in my network with hundreds of deals, none of them that I've met has a connector CRM they like. There are things that work, but the most sophisticated ones use a Google spreadsheet, a personal assistant, and their mind. Because nothing exists to catalog not just the connectivity we have, but the strength of those connections. And several years ago, right before COVID, I was about to build a startup, now named The Conspiracy, which I plan to build this summer as the start off with some seed funding to solve this one specific problem, which is that connectors do not have a toolkit to measure and track the strength of our connections. And if we were to do that in the right way, Josh, the problem that you have and others have as a connector would be solved, because you could demonstrate the potential value of your network to those seeking to work through you and transform their idea of working through you to working with you,
Mm-hmm.
without you having to advertise who's in your Rolodex and give away all your trade secrets.
Yeah. What they're asking is they're asking to work through me, not with me. To me, right off the bat, that just shows how they're going to treat the potential connection, right? And did they value that? So me protecting the connection is helping them revisit the value of a relationship, see it
Right.
differently. And you're like a judo guy, right? Like you're taking that and you're turning them and you're teaching along the method. In the world of connecting, and I made this mistake once, right? Someone, I was working in a startup community, built some entrepreneur centers, and someone came to me and they said, "Hey, will you introduce me to venture capitalist so and so?" I made the
Yeah.
connection, right? Because he was a friend of mine, the VC. So I made the connection, and then I get a phone call. I'm like, "Oh wow, the VC's calling me." Like it was like pretty rapid. He goes, "What the heck are you doing?" I said, "They're building a startup. They're looking for some support and advice." I made the connection. He goes, "Did you do any research on this guy or person that I introduced?" I was like, "No, not at all." I said, "I made an introduction. I met them at an event." And he goes, "I did just a basic Google search and I found all these frauds and scams and all this stuff."
Right.
He goes, "You're welcome them, like we built trust with you and you welcome them into our house." I was like, "Oh shit." Like I dropped the ball because I had a super high trusted relationship, high net worth individual and a super successful group. I dropped the ball there. I don't do that anymore. Now I
Yeah,
dig in before I do that. But that was one of the biggest mistakes. As you were building this, what was one of the biggest mistakes you made? And at what point was it like an aha, I have a business here. This is valuable. I could build a community. We could create impact.
sure. So I'll tell you this. I didn't make this mistake because I've been making it previously to launching this community.
Yeah.
So here's how it simply works, right? We mentioned our mutual friend, Jordan. If he introduced me to you and you were not a high integrity connector, I would remove him from my community because that's the threat. I believe all communities need risk. It's one of the 2 risks of my community, besides honoring the chain. I only want extremely vetted, high integrity people. I don't have the time to monitor it. I don't have the time to do background checks. So if Jordan is saying he would leave my children with you, how many people could he ever possibly make interest to like that from his network to mine? Which means I get a filtered approach of 2 to 5 people on average per connector. I might get those 2 to 5 from you. It's not the same as the relevance of your network, which is much larger. It's that in this community, I wanted only those people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought there'd be 40. I thought there'd be 100. I thought when COVID hit, my group of 500 might shrink, and I'm at 900 because there's a filtering process that if you set this up right, I've not had a single bad connector intro in 5.5 years.
Yeah.
So in the terms of the VC group, right, let me put it this way. If you met somebody at a conference and you can't figure out if somebody you know is in their deal, you got to take the time to get to know them. But if you figure out that this VC friend is in several deals, you can pretty much vouch already based on who they are and their diligence, that if you were to send them to a VC friend of mine asking for it, we brokered a powerful introduction because of our vetting system for how these people vet the people they associate or invest with.
Yeah.
And that is how the relationships are built amongst these super nodes. And this is why I only trade, quote, connections at that level. Because not only is there no time, but I've made it not relevant to what my ask is in the network, which is I only want the highest echelon of connectivity.
Yeah.
Either everyone succeeds in that or I'm a failure because I've not figured out the filtering process, the associative process to make sure that when I'm connecting somebody with you, mm-hmm. that this person is absolutely relevant for your time and theirs. Or my group, my code isn't as good as what I say it is.
Yeah. And this is a learned thing, right? You've learned along the way of how to do this. And then you've built systems to protect it. You built processes and you've found a problem and you're fixing the problem by putting a machine in place, a system, and machine. This is interesting.
Yeah, it is a machine, right? It's a machine that is run by the mind, the brain, which is a machine in many ways, and run by the fact that there's not necessarily one universality in connectivity and how people work. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you have to go with the psychology of it into a very practical process.
Yeah, totally. So you're writing a book. Give us a glimpse of some of the golden nuggets we might be able to pull out. Like, give me an idea when I
let me give you the cardinal rule, right? I've referred to this before of honoring the chain of connections, but let me give you a little bit more of the psychology of it. This is literally chapter 1. So let's say that an individual has made a series of introductions and gone down the road of intro to intro to intro to suddenly have success. They've just launched a climate fund and they're sitting on $50 million to help the environment. A lot of people, even though they have success, don't necessarily want to say, look what I did. I raised money. I'm successful. Look at me. A lot of people that want to have impact in particular are humble this way. The people that are saying, look at me, are the ones who are insecure. So how do you take somebody who, even if they're successful, still wants to be humble and give them the tools by which they can take credit for it? And given that every person raising a fund is looking for introductions and introductions. That's how you raise a fund. Yeah. Can you introduce me? Do you know, I need, like, it's only relationships. That's it. There's the value. It's people looking at the right time with people looking to find. So in this case, there's two ways to do the same thing. First off is you honor the chain by thanking everybody who led you to that successful fund. Not just individually, but collectively. Thank you, Dan, Natasha, Jamie, and Andrew for bringing me so-and-so to help fund my circular economy fund, or whatever it might be. Gratitude, right? Did anything strike you as wrong with me saying thank you to these fictional people in this case?
Nope.
And what if two of those people were billionaires? One was the daughter of Bill Gates. One was, the agent to a celebrity, right? You just said, not egotistically, look at all these people I know. Look at what just happened for me. Thank you all. What you actually did was lead with gratitude and build community as the practice. So honoring the chain seems simple. Thank the chain down the line, at least 5 deep, for a substantial intro that's happened. By thanking it, you say what success you've had. By exploring that gratitude in a community setting, a group thank you, a LinkedIn announcement, whatever it might be, an event, you're now weaving those people together, which means you're now showing that they each had relevance to each other, but connection 2 and connection 5 don't know each other. Guess what? I have found a catalyst of those introductions is the connector, and the other 2 to 4 people along the way mostly also are connectors or have relationship value, but when they know each other, sharing in your success, they now have built trust between or amongst each other. So a simple rule becomes a psychological approach of gratitude and community that lets you be egotistical and ego-less at the exact same time. And it solves the one problem all of us have, which is, let's say you were that catalyst for me if I was the one raising this fund, Josh. By embracing this rule, I did the thing you forgot to do 4 years ago when you made that intro for me. I recognized the connector as the catalyst. And I said, if it wasn't for Josh making the first intro for me, I wouldn't be where I am now. And if that practice was adopted and we traced it back, you will see in every circumstance, every merger and acquisition on this planet comes from a phone call of somebody to somebody else.
Totally.
So that's chapter 1. It's honor, because the opposite of honor is dishonor. There's no in between. There's a code for it. And that's the biggest insight I've ever given, right? It might be the only insight that I actually will say I smartly gave to this world. Because what it does is it solves every problem of connectivity in one practice.
When is this book coming out?
I'm on chapter 3. Yeah. I'm going to work on it this summer into fall. I'm launching a startup at the same time because I realized there were 2 problems in my community. One of which was I can't scale it until I have the tech needed to enable this at a larger value proposition. And 2, the biggest reason I built this community, Josh, was that I was missing out on opportunities until I connected the connectors to each other. And I'm missing out on those daily, simply for lack of capacity to connect people to each other. Mm-hmm. So the goal is launch a startup, write a book, still have time to exercise, sleep, and be a great dad. But with this, build the 2 parts of the toolkit, the larger understanding of the psychology from the book, but really the connector tech. I'm desperately waiting for somebody to say they built what's needed. But when your network have launched Fortune 500 tech companies and invested in all of this, and they go, hey, how do you keep track of everybody? Mm-hmm. I wish I could say something exists, but nothing exists that helps the connectors at the start. There's intro software, there's relationship management, there's a lot of these different components, but those are secondary to what you and I need right now, which is I would say to you, hey, Josh, a close friend is involved in health and wellness and media. Do you know any venture capitalists or family offices involved in basically Netflix meets Teledoc. Where's your database to look that up, right?
It's in
And that's
here.
a live ask
Yeah.
I'm making now for my friend Pedram for his incredible company called bepossible.com. I'm an impact strategist for him, and my focus is on helping him grow. But I literally have to go into a Google spreadsheet, onto LinkedIn, into a conference and go, hey, there's this amazing thing focused on women's health. Do you know any women investors that also like the idea of media? And then everyone thinks. They don't type into a database. They don't call their assistant. They go, my friend Laura's a woman investor. She's been focused on hormonal health. She owns 2 different women's health companies. Maybe she'd be relevant. What I want to do is I want to not automate that process. I want to take that process and do 2 things with it. First off, when you're having a hard day or an exhaustive day like I am, but probably you more than me, because it's much hotter in Florida than it is in New York today, right? You're out in that humid weather and mosquitoes are biting you and you're going, wait, David needed a women health, and that VC I mentioned before has a women's health vertical. You got to go on their website. You got to look. All that is data that exists. So I want to shortchange that for connectors so we can be more effective. The other part of it, because I'm always after solving everyone's problems, not just my own, is I want that to be of demonstrable value. So if my client comes to me and says, hey, I need another connector to help me with this, and this system, this tech I'm going to build can say, Josh Wilson has 32 potential connectors or connections to women investors in health. It doesn't tell me who you know, but it says, Josh, maybe you should have a deeper connection with this founder, a deeper talk. If you have 32 off the top of the database's head, I think you could add great relational value. Let's hire you for that.
This is cool, man. And I may know a few people. During this interview, so I love where this is going, but let me give you an opportunity to give people a chance to how to connect with you, right? So
Sure.
Someone goes, hey man, that's me. I'm a connector and I need to learn how to do this better. Or we see the value of a connector and we need help and we want to ask the right way. So let me bypass me for a second. What's a good way for people to go connect with you, learn more, and maybe get some help with you and with you? Did I say that right? With you, right? Yeah. Not through you, but with you.
Exactly. It's different terminology that matters. So the easiest thing is I make myself able to be found. So myself, David Homan, LinkedIn, Orchestrated Connecting, Orchestrated Opportunities. If you Google me in New York, like my cell phone pops up. I make this accessible. I respond to everyone, but I will tell anyone listening, come with an impact ask, read the article on my site, or listen to the 40 minutes ago in this podcast. Don't just go, hey, can you teach me how to connect? Because I don't teach people how to connect. I help connectors hone the skills you've all had for years. And I built a community that so far has no competition because we are each dominant in our own community and there was no community for us. It'd be cool if there was competition. Maybe I could not have to get my group from 900 to 3,000 before I build this tech. But I'm going to connect with everyone who has integrity that I can help. That's how I lean in. I give first, I don't ask. People want to work with me. I need to know what you stand for, what your values are. If somebody wants to connect to make money, you obviously didn't read anything I wrote. If you want to connect to help people, that's my sweet spot. The world is full of deals to make people money. There's no reason why you can't help people at the same time, not after. So I lead with it. You can literally read articles about this on me by Googling my name. You can also find out a lot about my classical music, which is where Orchestrated Connecting comes from. My music is intensely private, personal, and often helps people fall asleep when they're stressed or have insomnia. So I proudly say my music will help you feel better. But this idea of finding the right melody or the right connection is what I stand for. So if somebody thinks that there's relevance, then that outreach already wins me over because it means they made it 45 and a half or so minutes through the show. It also means that they take your value, Josh, and your word of who you choose to interview and why as a value that they cherish, which means the first thing I'm going to ask them to do when they connect with me is make sure they know it happened through you and to thank you for it, or I won't talk to them.
Super cool. In terms of music, what instruments do you enjoy playing?
So I enjoy playing piano because it's the only thing I can play. I'm trained to write orchestral music. I've done a sort of hybrid rock album, but I play piano. My kids want me to play Disney songs and Frozen and Greatest Showman. And now they want me to play Hamilton, but Hamilton on piano, not only am I not cool enough to do it, it doesn't work. So every time I try, they go too classical.
Super cool. If you could play with any musician, alive or dead, right? Like you get an opportunity to play side by side with any musician in history, who would you choose and what song would you play with them?
So I would specifically do a series of improvisations with Chick Corea, one of the best jazz pianists ever on the planet, whose improvisations were part of the catalyst for my composing music. And if I'd ever been able to meet or work with him, he would be the one that served as the opening of my doors to how improvisation and communication could be instant. And as much as I'd love to play with many others, he would be my favorite.
That's pretty cool. During this interview, I probably should have asked certain questions that I completely screwed up and did not ask you. What's a question I should have asked you?
You know, I think the question that you should have asked me isn't that question, because conversations go the way that they go. And if you have a prescription, even if you have a flow for your podcast, then you might be limiting the opportunity for what should be learned or gleaned from it, right? If things have a purpose and an intention and you're open, then the only thing you can do is close yourself off to what that answer needs to be. Mm-hmm. I don't approach any conversation or any interview with something I have to say.
Cool.
What I would say is, what's most relevant, right, in this conversation if people are listening is, if we are both power brokers of connections, and I am offering in many cases some of the honing of the solutions, then the question needs to be, how do we elevate this Deal Flow podcast so that it's not just sponsorship driven and bringing a lot of, alligators in the backyard for you, so to speak. But this idea that if you have access to vetted people and vetted deals, and I have access to the same, and we both sit with major relationships related to ultra high net worth, venture capital, and the rest, why isn't the phone ringing, so to speak? I mean, I turned my off so we didn't interrupt this podcast, but why isn't the phone ringing and people going, I get this. Not only am I a connector, but I'm going to invest in the connectors, the chief relationship officer, substantially for what I need. Because that's the question people should be asking. Because what I ask back to them is, tell me a single thing you invested in the last 3 months or 5 years that wasn't introduced to you by somebody else. That stare you give me is what everyone gives me back, which is, I can't think of a single thing in my life that didn't come from a relationship. So the question is, when will relationship value be valued above time and money for people to invest the money in our time to build it? I believe I can solve some of this through the connector tech I'm going to build. I believe that I'm solving some of this by giving connectors like you and others a peace of mind that you can say no, and here's how to be relevant and to create honor in what we do. But in the end, if every single person with means is chasing a deal for themselves or others, raising a fund, and they sit on relationships, what's the point where they're going to see their value is more than the money they have or the title they have? That their value, people ask of them, is the same of us. And it's about time that that rise of the rest, right, is the rise of connectors to have their reputational value be what people seek. That's the question I ask in every interview I make. That's the question you asked throughout this, but that's what I would say would be really great to emphasize near the close of this. And it's a question of when. It's not a question of if. But the question of when will make an enormous amount of difference for many of us who will not stop giving, who will not stop connecting, but simply do not have the way to say, guess what? I have access to the NFL and Hollywood and the NBA and venture capitalists and family offices and governments and states. Because the minute I say that right, even in jest, like those are all true for my network, I become irrelevant in terms of my trust. Because the trust I have, the trust you have, is based on being able to smartly, effectively, and efficiently make those intros. And the practice on the other side needs to be how to ask for that, how to understand it should be compensated, and not once a relationship has been made and somebody invests money in somebody else. At that point, you should be washing your hands of the interaction, not beginning it.
Super cool. One more time, good place for people to make that first initial impact ask.
Sure. Orchestratedconnecting.com is my website. My articles are there. You can see me talk and play piano at the exact same time. I look a lot younger than I do now, but it was a good video and I haven't had the budget to redo it. But I'm easy to be found for a reason. I'm not easy to get into my calendar, not just because I'm busy, but because what I ask for is give me the relevance beyond I might be a cool person to talk to. Yeah. I don't need more friends in life. I need people of high integrity who get the idea that giving first matters. And that's what I'm always looking for.
Yeah, man. Awesome. David, thanks for being on the show. Fellow deal makers in the community, I encourage you to go to the website and start learning, especially if you're a networker or connector or someone who has that high need for developing relationships and building that ecosystem. Go to David's website, start reading, start learning with me. I'm doing it too. And as always, all their contact information will be in the show notes below, so you can always connect directly to our guest. And the call to action here is if you're working on a deal, looking for a deal, or want to talk about it here on the show, head on over to thedealscout.com, fill out a quick form, and start out the conversation that way. David, I appreciate you. Fellow deal makers, love you. Hope you're having a great day. Talk to you all on the next episode.